that will make sure that New Zealand has our reputation for financial integrity restored. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, Sir. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to speak to this, the third reading of the Taxation Annual Rates for 16-17 Closely Held Companies and Remedial Matters Bill. Firstly, let me say, for the benefit of my colleagues on the other side of the House, New Zealand First will be supporting this legislation in the third reading, and I am grateful for their cries of delight. Sir, I will start off, though, by highlighting and putting to the House that at its core, our tax system relies heavily and is highly dependent on trust at its core. And so it was very scary when the minister in charge of destroying the New Zealand racing industry, growing the New Zealand racing industry, came out to take the first call on this, the third reading. His empty platitudes and generic descriptions of an ideal tax system must have sent shivers up the spine of Chris Bishop and other, and tax experts throughout the country, and in fact, taxpayers themselves. I just want to give a few quotes to the House. A number of items in the bill are business friendly. That was lovely to hear. We must always aim to uphold the integrity of the tax system. Absolutely lovely to hear. Ensuring that our tax rules work well in practice helps to keep the compliance cost to a minimum, which in turn helps our economy to grow and prosper. I tell you, for the 2.5 minutes he made his contribution, it was wonderful to hear. But that was the extent of the minister's contribution, and that was the fullest detail we got from the Minister of Racing. It was intriguing, to say the least. Mr. Speaker, I do know that some, and myself included, are concerned that we have less than a week to go before this law needs to come into effect. Indeed, the government's legislative schedule for this bill has accelerated somewhat speedily, is perhaps an understatement. And the reasoning for this is otherwise the government's appropriations over the last year will in fact be unlawful. I put it to the House that that does not in fact inspire any kind of trust at all in this government's legislation capabilities. So, in terms of the annual rates, which was a significant part of the legislation, although a small part of the legislation, it has remained unchanged for many years. I think off the top of my head it's been 6 years. And this, even though we've got a week to go, this government still has an opportunity to be very clear before the election to either make a statement on low-income and middle-income earners, or to address the fiscal drag issue, for example. But I would suggest to the members opposite that firstly they need to stop talking about their scandalously named surpluses. Instead ask, can they actually get government services such as the police, health, education is a great example, just out there this afternoon taking and receiving a submission from Early Childhood Education, who outlined in great detail how their services alone have been shortchanged by $500 million since this government came in and changed the laws, nearly $500 million just in early childhood education. That is the indictment on this national government at the moment. So what I'm suggesting is their scandalously named surpluses are ridiculous. What they need to instead do is talk about getting us back to the point at which they actually took over. Get us back to the start and then own up to the problems ahead of us, and then they might be able to have this conversation about the annual rates. Although I think they're still in denial, and they still need to actually build some homes for the homeless people of New Zealand, which just is an anathema to say in this House, the homeless people of New Zealand. I can't believe I'm saying that, sir. They actually need houses, and the government needs to be part of the solution, but that is not going to happen. This government will not own up, will not admit that there is a problem. The annual rates provided us with an opportunity to have a conversation, which did come up in the second reading, Mr Speaker, about secondary tax rates. In a world where the government has promoted and advanced the thinking around a mobile and flexible workforce, that government, refuses to even talk about changing the secondary tax rate rules, where right now people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and we're talking 3 or 4 every week because they're holding down 2 or 3 jobs, are paying exorbitant rates of tax on the second job. It doesn't matter that it's not enough to support their families. Doesn't matter that it's not enough to pay the rent. This government will not admit to the problem or do anything about it. Mr Speaker, in the second reading we noted that the government's revenue strategy seeks to ensure that our tax system is broadly fair to encourage voluntary compliance. What the Minister who spoke at the time needs to realise is that not all business believes in that voluntary part. Recent revelations highlighting what we already knew regarding multinational corporates and their zero tax payments would seem to suggest that broadly fair, in this government's mind, might only apply to international big business, sir, whilst our wage and salary earners, our small and medium-sized New Zealand-based businesses must bear an exorbitant share of the tax burden that this government is putting on them. In fact, I put it to the House that it was only last year that Minister Joyce boasted to us that it was the middle class and the wealthy who were bearing the greatest burden of the tax in New Zealand. He said it like it was a good thing, like the middle class, which is currently struggling just to survive and in fact is moving down into the lower class, should be proud that they're paying an unnecessary and high tax burden. So it's an issue that the government has refused year after year to hold big business to account in terms of their tax obligations, and whether we call them evasion or avoidance is beside the point. This government has for years spoken about those kind of tax practices being smart business. They have suggested that if they enforce the tax rules, those businesses might not want to operate in New Zealand. They even suggested that it was too hard and too complex. And then they said, oh, no, we have to work with the OECD in order to make this unilaterally fair across all borders. It just doesn't make sense, and in the meantime, New Zealanders are suffering, sir. I do want to touch on another point that has been raised, and that was in this legislation with regards to the reporting and recording of foreign trusts. So New Zealand First was indeed part of a minority report that suggested to this House that we needed, whilst we had taken great steps in the right direction, we still have some transparency issues, and the publication of the list might be one of those issues that we needed to deal with. So, sir, with little time on the clock, I do want to say that the government has achieved some good things in this legislation. We think that we will support this bill because in the main it actually does what it says it will. And just to end it, I'd just like to actually have a brief conversation with Mr Bishop, in that I agree with him, which does surprise all in the House today, around the need to use legislation to alter or adjust the donors, the charities the list. But bear in mind, Mr Bishop, currently under this government's administration, there is far too much power given by order of council to ministers and their discretionary powers, or their obligations to talk to their mates in order to make a consulted and engaged decision with the stakeholders in the community. But in the main, Mr Speaker, we congratulate the government for this legislation and do in fact commend it to the House. Thank you, sir.
Oh, Mr. Speaker.
Chris Bishop.
Oh, thank you.